Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Politics, a regular look at the events happening right here in the Quinte region and the people working so hard behind the scenes to make it happen. I'm your co-host, Paul Martin. Joining me, my regular co-host, regular columnist for the Belleville Intelligencer, Colin Mackay.
Thanks, Paul.
And our guest this week, a name that has been very prominently featured throughout the Quinte region for the past 3 months and beyond. Newest Belleville Councillor, Tyler Allsopp.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, there was a saga, you might say, that has gone on for about the last 3 months, and it ended in a way. Yet another chapter began when a very momentous decision was made at Belleville City Council. And let's take a look at the big moment right now.
Yes.
Councillor Carr?
Yes.
Councillor Kelly?
Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Councillor Millette?
Yes.
Councillor McCaw?
No.
Councillor Sanderson?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
Yes.
Mayor Panchuk?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, congratulations now, as soon as he gets sworn in, Councillor Tyler Allsopp.
And that's how it happened here at Belleville City Council not that long ago. So Tyler, you just had a chance to see it again. You saw it as it happened. That was the moment when they appointed you to be now the new 9th member of Belleville Council. How did it feel then, and how does it feel again, reflecting back on it now?
You know, I think the overriding feeling at the time was really a sense of relief, because it had been a long process. I think it became more contentious than anyone had wanted. And so I really felt that it was, we'd gotten to the end of the journey now. It's like, okay, now the real work starts, but at least we've gotten through this period. We don't have to go over this too much anymore. And so it was a very freeing feeling, because it does occupy a lot of space in your mind, especially when you're engaged in something where you have points that you want to make and you have arguments that you want to put forward, but you have to do so in a very respectful manner. So there's this sort of one step forward, half a step back thing that I had to do for quite a while. So I felt really good when that was all put to bed. And I thought that their comments were appropriate and were respectful. And that was another thing I was looking for. If we did get the reconsideration, what would it sound like? What sort of things would they be, still putting forward? And I thought for the most part, it was handled very respectfully and in a way that allowed us to move forward from that point.
So during the time, was there ever a time when you sort of felt down about this at all?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where I knew that this was not going to be an overnight thing. No matter what I did, I wasn't going to be able to get the result that we had hoped for overnight. So I did have to maintain a very narrow emotional band. You can't be in a position where you have spikes and then you have valleys. You can't be furious one day and then depressed the next day, and because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to go too far and then not far enough. So I really had to contain myself. So I take a step back. And one of my philosophies in life is that things don't happen to me, things happen, and then I decide how I feel about them. And I think that gives me a little bit more power to go, okay, something's happening that is upsetting maybe, or that doesn't feel the way I thought it would feel, but that's okay. We can adjust, we can assess, and we can move forward with the plan from there.
Now, there were several stages to this, and we were just talking about this before you came on. That it's not something that was decided just that day. There was the entire process that led up to it. And of course, that's a process that began with the untimely passing of Pat Culhane in early November. So one thing we can never forget during the whole process was that you're going into a seat that was occupied by someone else. So you haven't really had a chance to express your thoughts on that. How do you feel about being someone who is moving into a seat that was occupied by someone who was so beloved by the community?
Well, yeah, and Pat Culhane had a tremendous career in the community, both as a nurse for nearly 50 years, and then also as a counselor as well. And so it really is a person who is a tremendous person for this community, a tremendous spokesperson for women, someone who really wanted to do the most that she could for the people that were vulnerable. And I think that's something that a lot of nurses share, but even her activism for the Humane Society, and you could really tell that Pat was someone who wanted to fight for the little person. And those are big shoes to fill, and I don't necessarily view it as I'm taking her place or trying to fill those shoes, but certainly she was a very powerful voice around council, a very knowledgeable and beloved person, and so there will be a little bit of that where people look and go, okay, if this is the person that's going to assume the seat, what is it that they're going to bring? So I think that there is a challenge in that, and certainly, when you look at the type of career she's had, I haven't had that type of that amount of time to do that. So I look forward to the challenge, but certainly, that was a very sad thing for Belleville, and I think that a lot of people really felt that Belleville had lost a great person that had been great to them.
At that point, then, it was so shocking because that happened. The other council members were only informed in the early morning hours of Monday. There's a council meeting that day. So they have 12, 16 hours to process that news. They postponed business for 2 weeks. The seat's declared vacant. And then shortly after then comes the decision, at some point, the business of the city has to move forward. And they have to talk about filling that seat. You can't replace Pat.
Of course.
But at some point, the seat can no longer be vacant. Let's go through that process. So at first, they decided not to hold the by-election. If things didn't go out the way you thought they might, and you were appointed here, were you prepared to go to a by-election?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was prepared to do that. And that's something that I would have looked forward to, because there were a lot of questions out there and a lot of people that were supporting me, obviously, which I greatly appreciate. I mean, obviously, without the kind of community support that I had throughout this process, it would have been much more difficult and it would have been much less likely to be successful. So I really did appreciate that outpouring of support from the community. But no, certainly it was, it was an interesting thing to have happen. And like you said, the council members didn't have a lot of time before their meeting started. I woke up that Monday morning with members of the media calling me saying, what do you think about Pat Culhane's passing and what that might mean for you? And, that was, I think, starting at 7 o'clock that morning. I had just woken up and I'm getting the phone calls. And so that was a particularly difficult time, because obviously people want to hear from you, but I felt that it was certainly inappropriate on that day to go out and say anything, right? I mean, we have a tendency now to want to move on from things very quickly. And I felt that the passing of someone that was that significant to this city, we shouldn't be talking about where we go from here. We should be talking about the person that was and the people that loved her and making sure that they were taken care of and that they felt loved and that the community had an opportunity to show that appreciation because, too often people don't get the flowers while they can still smell them. And, I felt it was really important that she at least have that day.
So after those couple days, when you had time to think about it, did you start to think, well, maybe they'll pick me? Did you ever think that at any point in the process?
Yeah, well, certainly people were reaching out to me and saying, what this probably means for you. And I said, well, I understand that there is precedent there, and that's
Historical
certainly
precedent.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 times in the early 2000s, it had been done that way, that the next highest vote getter was appointed, and those had not been contentious processes. So it seemed that was likely the thing that was going to happen, especially with the backdrop of the global pandemic. I didn't expect that we would be going to a by-election, because obviously a by-election has to be conducted to the best of your ability in the same way that the previous election was, which means polling stations, which means volunteers out there. A lot of the people who volunteer to run polling stations are older people, so they're in a demographic that's at risk. And it seemed to me that although that was not off the table, that was probably not the appropriate way to do that. And then from a cost perspective as well. I mean, COVID-19 has been very expensive for everybody, but certainly the city had lost about $3.7 million in revenue, largely through fees and service charges and things like that. So to spend another $200,000 or $225,000, it seemed like an illogical thing to do given that backdrop.
Were you surprised when they decided to go to an ad hoc committee and not appoint you? Or is that something that you were sort of expecting it after a few days?
That was a big moment. So at that point leading up to the meeting, you must have been expecting that, probably given precedent, that vote was going to happen then. And then how were you feeling leading up to that? And were you surprised at the result when they decided to vote to not appoint you that day?
Well, yeah, so that was a very interesting thing. And I think that even people who were on the outside looking in and were watching that meeting, there was a real tension in the air at that meeting. Even people's opening statements on this appointment process, were very polarized, right? Some people were, this would be an affront to democracy not to. You're going, wow, we're opening up with affront to democracy. And then on the other side, we're talking about, Black Lives Matter and things of that nature. I'm going, I don't know that a lot of that has to do with me. So that was a little bit tough to watch. And certainly, it was not the process that I had anticipated. The ad hoc committee, isn't really something that had been on the table in the past. So that was sort of caught a lot of people off guard. I think that was a path that they were looking to go to. And even some of the ways it was discussed, Garnet Thompson was making his point about, the next in line, and I had been put in the next in line, and there was a point of order, well, we haven't said the person's name yet, and then it was sort of put out there, well, we all know who you mean. And so I was watching that and I thought, well, do we all know who they mean? I mean, why is it that there's this aversion to bringing me into the process? And then, even the two councillors who made the move to appoint me both voted against that motion. So I did leave, having watched that meeting, I didn't leave the meeting, but, turned off the computer and thought, that's very strange that they sort of put me on the floor just to kill it and then open up with this process that no one had seen before. So yeah, that struck me as odd, and that was a confusing time for me.
Did it strike you as odd that it was your name specifically that was mentioned when they made the motion?
Yeah, because I think a couple councillors, Ryan Williams in particular, said, is the motion Tyler Allsopp or is it next in line? Because next in line has historical precedent, Tyler Allsopp doesn't. It means the same thing, but it's sort of a...
Does it really mean the same thing?
Right, does it mean the same? Right, exactly. So I thought that was interesting, that that had been sort of maneuvered that way, but it is what it is. No, I haven't already made a decision about 2022 either way. Obviously, this is something I very much want to do, and now I have the opportunity to do it, and we're going to see how that goes. This could be something where you get in there and find, okay, this is, I'm not able to maybe affect change in the way I had hoped, or maybe things will be moving at a pace that is perhaps glacial in nature, and then we won't be able to get to where I want to get to. So those things still have to be hashed out, but I think at this moment, if things go well and we're able to work together and we have a productive time on council, I would look at perhaps running again in 2022. But I don't think I want to be one of those guys who's there forever. I think maybe a term and a half, which is would be if I were thankful and grateful enough to be elected in 2022, 6 years, 10 years, that sort of thing. But I'm not looking to start at 28 and go to 60.
Thank you, Tyler. This has been Tyler Allsopp on Beyond the Politics.